Young twist makes the beat. Young twist makes the beat.
This topic is going to be on brain newts, as I explained in my first video about newts, neutrons or neutrinos, which originate from the centers of suns or stars due to supernova explosion of a dead star. Now, the neutrons or neutrinos are subatomic particles that bond together with protons to form the nucleus of an atom, which give the atom its atomic mass, and the electrons don't orbit the nucleus but are orbital in the electron cloud surrounding the atom. Now here's an example of what an atom would look like.
The size of an atom is only a few angstroms. There are 10 billion angstroms in 1 meter. When you think of an atom, you probably picture something like this. On the outside, you've got electrons that have a negative charge. In the middle is the nucleus. It's made of neutrons which have no charge and protons which have a positive charge. This model is a good starting point, but there are a few things here that don't quite agree with modern science. For one, the size of the nucleus is a lot smaller than this. If I animate it to scale, you wouldn't even be able to see it. The same thing with these electrons. Another thing that's inaccurate is that electrons orbit the nucleus just like a planet orbits a star. Unfortunately, this is still taught in many textbooks, but it's just not correct. Let me cover some background first. Over 2,000 years ago, ancient Greek philosophers had this idea that everything was made of tiny particles. They called these tiny particles atoms. It wasn't until the 1800s that we finally started using science to prove that these atoms really exist. First, we thought atoms looked like this: a positively charged sphere with negatively charged electrons floating around it. Then we learned that this positively charged sphere was actually a lot smaller. We called this the nucleus. Slowly but surely we learned that the nucleus is made up of protons and neutrons. These electrons were tricky. At first we thought, they have to be doing something, so they probably revolve around the nucleus like this. Electrons were then discovered to have different energy levels. We call these shells. Shells can only fit a certain amount of electrons. The more electrons, the more shells. It didn't take long before we realized that these shells don't determine how close the electron is to the nucleus. As it turns out, electrons are a lot more unpredictable. So if electrons don't orbit the nucleus, what do they do? Let's start with an idea of an orbit. Here we have the Earth going around the Sun. If the Earth is here today, we can use the laws of physics and gravity to predict exactly where the Earth will be 3 months from now. We know both where the Earth is and where it's going. Now let's go to the size of an atom. With an electron, things are a little different. We can't know exactly where it is and where it's going. We can only know one or the other at any given time. This means that it is impossible to really know what the electron is doing. The best we can do is predict where the electron will be found. This area is most commonly known as the electron cloud. However, if we want to be more specific about where to find electrons, you'll need to know about orbitals. This is not the same as orbit. Orbitals are specific shapes where electrons live in. If you were in a college chemistry class, you'd be studying about how these orbitals fill up as you get more electrons. But I'd like to keep things simple for this video. So in short, electrons are uncertain. We can't know the path that they travel. only that they'll be found here in the electron cloud. So now you know that even though this is a popular way to represent an atom, it can be misleading. Just to recap what we learned, everything is made of atoms. Atoms are incredibly small, the nucleus is even smaller, and electrons don't orbit the nucleus. Their path is unpredictable. Thanks for watching, everyone. My name is Jared.
As you can see, that the nucleus is the core of the atom. Now let's look at the etymology meaning of what nucleus means. The etymology of nucleus is a diminutive of nox, which is nut, and the noun nucleus, masculine genitive nuclei, second declension, 1 literally, small nut, 2 kernel, figuratively core, and 4 nucleus. Now you can see that nucleus means nut, which is the core, and also the word noot, N-O-O-T, which is a pronoun meaning nothing, and the noun of noot, which is nut, N-U-T. Now here's an example. As you can see, noot meaning nothing, and the etymology, which is nut. Now the brain aspect of a nucleus is that the nucleus, which is the brain of the cell, is similar to the physical brain of the human, because the brain and the nucleus are both dictate what the person or cell does. The nucleus controls eating, movement, and reproduction, same as the physical brain. And without a brain or nucleus, the cell or living organism or physical organism would die.
The nucleus is often referred to as the control center of the cell, since this structure ultimately directs the cell's many activities. The nucleus contains the macromolecule vital to all life, deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. The nucleus is surrounded by a nuclear membrane, which is composed of a double layer of lipids and proteins. The nuclear membrane controls access to the instructions encoded within the DNA. The DNA found in the nucleus contains coded messages called genes that each cell uses to make thousands of different proteins, enabling it to live and to reproduce. The instructions encoded along the DNA are eventually passed on to successive generations of cells as each parent cell divides. When cells begin to divide, the chromatin, containing DNA and protein, condenses and forms rod-shaped bodies called chromosomes. Chromosomes are responsible for carrying the hereditary information from one generation to the next.
The nucleus has 4 major functions. They include storing genetic material, such as DNA. It also acts like the brain of the cell, controlling all of the functions of the individual organelles surrounding the nucleus. All expressed traits of an organism originate from the DNA that is protected in the nucleus.
Nature of Nature, Book 1, number 63, page 58. Brain newts and brains are one and the same for all practical purposes by nature, except visibly and examined by people, because, as stated in the preceding topic, brain newts are neither microscopic nor macroscopic in the top half of the smack circle order nor the bottom half. It is true, though, that brain is an attribute of and substitute for brain newts while brain lives.
True mental cosmic peace in war times. My name is A-Noot Boonoo Noopooh, also known as Kepoo Noopooh, the bladder, and we have two more guests on the line, two other Noone Boos who's going to introduce themselves, and then we're going to go from there. A-Noot, go ahead.
True peace, everybody out there. True peace to the kids and the friends of the African race. My name is A-Noot Boonoo Noopooh, and that basically means that I represent the bone marrow in a race. And we're gonna do this recording because it's very it's a beneficial recording to let people know how research and things get done, and to bring forth more light towards information that we basically promote and promulgate. So I'm just here to expand and expound even more upon what's being built. So that's who I am, A-Noot Boonoo Noopooh.
All right. You up, Kepoo?
True peace, everyone. This is Kepoo Noopooh, and you want me to?
Yeah, you can just, since you're the one that did the video that they will see before this audio goes up, is to explain basically your research. What put you to go into this particular topic, and then what was your methodology to coming to that conclusion to the information that you brought through in the video, basically.
Okay, I was doing research on BRAIN NOOTs. I was just typing it in as it is in the books, and I wasn't getting nothing. So I looked back into the nature books, and every time you see the word BRAIN NOOTs, it always was the word center was always there. They always described it as the center of the suns, or the centers of attraction.
Mm-hmm.
So then I looked up what is the center of the human brain, and the word basal nuclei came up.
Mm-hmm.
So the word basal nuclei, meaning a group of subcortical nuclei of varied origin in the brains of vertebrates, including humans, which are situated at the base of the forebrain. So now I researched the word basal because I already know what nuclei is, which is a nucleus. Now the word basal, meaning basic, elementary, relating to or forming the base or point of origin, just like the word basal and omnibasal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, from both of these definitions, it's telling me that the nucleus is the
Go ahead, we listening.
Now there was a word that I remember doing research on neutrinos, in which they were called elementary. Now when you look up the word basal, the word elementary is used in that definition, and elementary means the same thing as basal. And one of the definitions for elementary was relating to physics, subatomic particles. Now I looked up what a subatomic particle is, and it's particles that are continuous from the atom or are smaller than an atom, such as protons, neutrons, electrons, etc. So then I researched the word neutron because it looks similar to the word neutrino. So as I'm reading on, and I came across is that word neutron was changed to neutrino. So now that I know that neutrons are associated with atoms, I researched if atoms have a nucleus, and it says that the nucleus is formed by neutrons and protons by concentration. So now that I know that the brain and the atom have a nucleus, then I looked up the function of the nucleus in the human, and it says that the nucleus holds all information for eating, movement, and reproduction.
Basal ganglia. The basal ganglia comprise a group of substructures that regulate the initiation of movements, balance, eye movements, and posture. They are strongly connected to other motor areas in the brain and link the thalamus with the motor cortex. The basal ganglia are also involved in cognitive and emotional behaviors and play an important role in reward and reinforcement, addictive behaviors, and habit formation. Associated functions include movement regulation, skill learning, habit formation, and reward systems. The basal ganglia is comprised of several substructures including the nucleus accumbens, the caudate nuclei, the putamen, the globus pallidus, the subthalamic nucleus, and the substantia nigra. Case study. The volume of several parts of the basal ganglia and of the limbic system was measured in post-mortem brains of 13 schizophrenic patients and 9 control cases. The medial limbic structures of the temporal lobe and the pallidum internum were significantly smaller in the schizophrenic group, whereas the pallidum externum showed only a modest trend toward volume reduction. Associated cognitive disorders. The basal ganglia are particularly associated with movement disorders such as Parkinson's and Huntington's disease. In terms of cognitive disorders, basal ganglia abnormalities have been found in individuals with schizophrenia and may explain habit learning deficits associated with the disorder. The basal ganglia may also contribute to the neuropathology of depression, particularly in relation to the limbic system. Conditions associated with damage include tremors, involuntary muscle movements, abnormal increase in muscle tone, difficulty initiating movement, and abnormal posture.
Now I'm thinking about what is newts. So I looked up the etymology of nucleus and I got the word nut. Now I'm thinking to myself, this makes sense because you can't see neutrons form the nucleus because they're invisible to the eyes, just like a nut in the shell and the brain in a skull. Then I researched the word newt, the way it is spelled in the nature books, and I got the definition meaning nothing, and the etymology, which is nut. That's how I came up with brain noots.
You wanted to comment on that, A-Noot?
Well, that's excellent. You know, the methodology behind it, because the thing about it is always going back to the origin of things. You know, and the origin. You know, if just typing in something, especially for the nature books, is not going to give you the answer. Just like if we look up words in a dictionary today, you may not get the original meaning of a particular thing by just typing it in a dictionary. If a dictionary was upgraded, let's say in 2017 or 16. But if you go back to the original meaning, which is the etymology of particular words, phrases, and things like that, it's going to lead you back to what you're looking for. And that's what led you to go a little further by doing the etymology of, of these particular words, like, because the word new, or, just like in the word noose, just like in Noopooh as well, that word new, no matter how it's spelled, is basically leads to brain activity. Just like a neurosurgeon, or neurological diseases, words like noose, Noopooh, that N-O-O or that N-E-U, that relates to something that's dealing with the center of a brain or a brain itself. So going back to the etymology of words will always lead you to the correct path, because you have to know where something is coming from in order to know where you're going. So that was good research that you did as far as the brain noots and things of that is concerned. Another thing too is to understand that brain noots are not a singular thing. So they're composed of different, like you said earlier, subatomic particles. You'll have neutrinos, you'll have, electrons, neutrinos are smaller than the electron and the protons and things like that. But all of those things combine to make that particular noop. Because that's why in the nature books, if you go to nature books, it says that, these things might be singular in name, but plural in purpose. Like when somebody was questioning me about my name, they said, well, a newt, how can you be just, one newt? I had to explain to them that my name is a newt, because I'm a singular person, but I'm also plural in purpose because I work for the entire African race and for the entire mentality of Noopooh. Because Noopooh is also a singular name, but plural in purpose. That doesn't mean that it's just one thing. It operates in a variation of ways in which, it will be plural in whatever it is that it's doing or it's designed to do. So it's very important for people to understand that aspect of things. There was something else I wanted to touch on real quick. Oh, yeah, so a brain noot is composed of all the different neutrinos and protons, neutrons, electrons, all those various things come together and form a brain noot. And many different brain noots compose to form molecules. More molecules compose to form other larger organisms and things. So the creative force would be a brain noot because they come together to create something. You understand what I'm saying? This is why it's so important for the black family to come together, because this is the first level of creation, is understanding how powerful family is. A brain noot is a family. You can't separate a brain noot and expect to create things. It's not going to happen. You have to be able to come together as a unit, and then you can begin to create all over again. But I don't want to get long-winded with it. I don't know if you guys want to touch or expound on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Kepoo. What is the point that you wanted to bring across in the video?
Oh, the point in the video I was going to bring across is that I used the atom and also the cell of the DNA just to show that they both function the same. It has the nucleus. It functions in a plant's nucleus, DNA or whatever. It still functions like a brain.
Okay.
Regardless.
Okay. So, will you be doing any more follow-up videos on this particular topic so people who may not understand it can get a better equal standing of it?
Yeah, by as me doing more research, I came up to what the word reason that's in the book. I came up on what that is. Reason, what they call it is particle resonance.
University doing research at Jefferson Lab. When we think of resonance, we tend to think of something like a bell. When you hit a bell, it vibrates at a certain frequency, this resonant frequency. For particles, if we hit them together, they vibrate in a certain way too, but instead of giving off sound, they make new particles.
And you look up the word resonance, I think plural form of resonance is reason. And it's basically this, in the books, nature books, he mentions that the brain noots scattering. That's what when the particles come in contact with each other, they emit neutrons. That's reason.
That's interesting because and I'm glad that this came out because the Wapians was, because they're plagiarizing and they're trying their best to throw it all together. It makes no sense. Like they say, they'll say this coming out one of their books. I don't know which one it is, but it's a reasoning. The reason is natural ether energy produced by brain concentration and investigating what is real from what you wish was real, or factology from theology. It works as brain noot and newts, prime moving matter. It melts down. Then they have, a picture with the bowl and stuff and have noot equals newts. And let's talk about mind, but again, we know that they plagiarized and they just guessing at the unknown because they're using noot as it's spelled. As far as Egypt is concerned, and we know that Noot is a goddess. And let me just get the definition real quick, so we can add that into the equation. Because they mixing and matching, and that's why it's always a problem. All right, Noot is just a basic Wikipedia. Noot, ancient Egyptian Noot, NWT, also known by various other transcriptions, is this goddess of the sky. In the Ennead of ancient Egyptian religion, she was seen as a star-covered nude woman arching over the earth, or as a cow. When you get a little bit down into it, it says Noot is the daughter of Shu and Tefnut. Her brother and husband is Geb. She had 4 or 5 children: Osiris, Set, Isis, and Nephthys, and in other early Egyptian sources, Horus. She is considered one of the oldest deities among the Egyptian pantheon, with her origin of being found on the creation story of Heliopolis. She was originally the goddess of the nighttime sky, but eventually became referred to as simply the sky goddess. Her hairdress was the hieroglyphic of part of her name, a pot, which may also symbolize the uterus. Mostly depicted in nude human form, Noot was also sometimes depicted in the form of a cow whose great body formed the sky and heavens, a sycamore tree, or as a giant sow suckling many piglets representing the stars. A sacred symbol of Noot was the ladder used by Osiris to enter her heavenly skies. This ladder symbol was called the maquette, and was placed in tombs to protect the deceased and to invoke the aid of the deity of the dead. Noot and her brother Geb may be considered enigmas in the world of mythology, in direct contrast to most other mythologies, which usually develop a sky father associated with an earth mother or mother nature. She personified the sky and he the earth. So as you go into it, it has nothing to do with reason or brain newts or any of those type of things. And so that being the case, that shows and proves that they are definitely confused about brain newts, and they're simply just going off the way of sound of newts as the way the ancient Egyptians looked at it. These two are not related in any form or fashion. A newt actually added on to the videos, because we did newt in the in Noone science based upon certain information we was researching at the time, but A-Noot got a little bit more he wanted to add on to it. So A-Noot, go ahead and break it down as far as what newt really is in Noone science.